Millionaire woman weds a nobody in Vegas, he vanishes. Then returns with the secret Alexandra Blackwood had. Built her real estate empire on the principle that every decision should be calculated, every risk measured, and every outcome anticipated. At 35, she commanded a portfolio worth $200 million spanning luxury developments from Manhattan to Malibu. Her penthouse office in downtown Los Angeles offered panoramic views that reminded her daily of the empire she had constructed through relentless focus and strategic thinking. But Las Vegas had always been Alexandra's weakness, the one place where her carefully maintained control dissolved into something more primal and unpredictable. She visited the city quarterly for business conferences, but inevitably found herself drawn to the high-stakes poker tables, where fortunes changed hands with the turn of a card. The weekend that would alter her life forever began like countless others. Alexandra had flown to Vegas for a real estate investment summit, staying at the Bellagio in a suite that cost more than most people earned in a month. The conference itself was routine networking events filled with familiar faces, presentations about market trends she had anticipated months earlier, and deal-making conversations that would generate millions in future transactions. Saturday evening found Alexandra at Aria's private poker room, playing in a game with stakes that would terrify ordinary players, but felt comfortable to someone with her resources. She was ahead by $40,000 when James Mitchell joined the table, taking the seat directly across from her with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. James appeared unremarkable at first-glance medium. Height, brown hair, wearing a simple black suit that looked expensive but not ostentatious. His poker playing was competent but not exceptional, and he engaged in the table's casual conversation with the easy charm of someone comfortable in social situations without being the center of attention. What caught Alexandra's attention wasn't James's appearance or his poker skills, but his complete indifference to her obvious wealth and status. Other players at the table treated her with the mixture of respect and calculation that her reputation commanded, but James interacted with her as if she were simply another player rather than one of the most powerful women in American real estate. A break in the game, Alexandra found herself in conversation with James at the bar. He claimed to work in consulting, traveling frequently for projects he described in vague terms that suggested either discretion or deception. When Alexandra mentioned her own business interests, James responded with polite interest but no signs of recognition or the subtle positioning that usually characterized her interactions with strangers. James's background, as he described it, was thoroughly ordinary. He had grown up in suburban Denver, attended State University for business, and worked for various consulting firms that specialized in organizational efficiency. He had never been married, traveled extensively for work, and seemed content with a lifestyle that prioritized experiences over accumulation. Alexandra found this ordinariness oddly compelling. Her world was populated by ambitious individuals who viewed every interaction as an opportunity for advancement. James's apparent lack of agenda was refreshing, even intoxicating. In its simplicity, the poker game resumed and continued until nearly dawn. Alexandra and James found themselves the last two players, engaged in increasingly complex hands that revealed both their competitive natures and their mutual respect for each other's abilities. When the game finally ended, they had essentially broken even, but both had enjoyed the intellectual challenge more than the financial stakes. What happened next defied every principle that had guided Alexandra's adult life. Instead of returning to her suite for the few hours of sleep before her flight home, she suggested they continue their conversation over breakfast. James agreed, and they found themselves at a 24-hour diner off the Strip, talking about everything except their professional lives. James revealed himself to be surprisingly well-read, with opinions about literature, politics, and philosophy that demonstrated both intelligence and thoughtfulness. He listened to Alexandra's perspectives with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was processing rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. As the sun rose over the desert, Alexandra made a suggestion that shocked even herself. Why didn't they explore Vegas together, treating it as an adventure rather than a business trip? James's smile in response was worth more than all the poker winnings she had accumulated over the years. The day that followed felt like a scene from a romantic comedy. They visited attractions that Alexandra had never bothered to see, despite dozens of trips to the city. They rode the roller coaster at New York, took selfies at the Bellagio fountains, and shared overpriced cocktails at rooftop bars while watching the city sprawl beneath them. More importantly, they talked. James's stories about his travels revealed a man who valued experiences over possessions, who found meaning in connecting with people from different cultures and backgrounds. Alexandra found herself sharing aspects of her life that she rarely discussed with anyone: her childhood in foster care, her determination to create security that could never be taken away, and her occasional loneliness despite being surrounded by people who wanted something from her. By evening, they were both slightly drunk on expensive wine and the intoxicating feeling of genuine connection. When James suggested they get married at one of Vegas's famous chapels, Alexandra's first instinct was to laugh at the absurdity of the idea. But something about the suggestion appealed to the part of her that had always rebelled against conventional expectations. Her entire life had been built on careful planning and strategic decision-making. The idea of doing something completely spontaneous, without considering the consequences or potential complications, felt like the ultimate act of freedom. The ceremony at the little chapel of the flowers was everything that Alexandra's carefully planned future wedding would not have been. No guest lists to manage, no vendors to coordinate, no media coverage to consider. Just two people making an impulsive commitment, witnessed by strangers who would forget them within hours. James looked genuinely moved during the brief ceremony, his eyes never leaving Alexandra's face as they exchanged simple vows written by the chapel staff. When he kissed her after the officiant pronounced them married, Alexandra felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: complete trust in another person. They returned to Alexandra's suite as husband and wife, giddy with the magnitude of what they had done. The luxury accommodations that had seemed routine hours earlier now felt like the setting for the most important night of her life. James marveled at the opulence with the appreciation of someone unused to such extravagance, but without the calculating assessment that characterized most people's reactions to her wealth. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, filled with the excitement of new lovers and the strange intimacy of people who had committed to each other on the basis of 24 hours of acquaintance. Alexandra felt more vulnerable and more alive than she had in years. But when Alexandra woke the next morning, James was gone. Her first assumption was that he had stepped out for coffee or breakfast, perhaps wanting to surprise her with room service. But his clothes were missing from the bathroom. His wallet and phone were no longer on the nightstand, and there was no note explaining his absence. Alexandra's confusion quickly transformed into concern, then worry, and finally a cold fear that she had been the victim of an elaborate con. She checked her bank accounts, credit cards, and business assets, expecting to discover evidence of theft or fraud. But everything remained exactly as she had left it. The hotel's security footage showed James leaving the building at 6 in the morning, carrying a small duffel bag and walking with the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly where he was going. He hadn't checked out officially, hadn't taken a taxi or rideshare that could be traced, and seemed to have simply vanished into the Las Vegas morning. Alexandra spent the rest of Sunday searching for any trace of James Mitchell. The consulting companies he had mentioned had no record of employing anyone by that name. The Denver address he had provided didn't exist. The university he claimed to have attended had no alumni matching his description. Most disturbing of all, the credit card he had used to buy chips at the poker game belonged to an account that appeared to have been created specifically for that weekend, with a payment history that suggested it was being managed by someone with sophisticated financial resources and knowledge of banking systems. Alexandra returned to Los Angeles in a state of confusion and growing anger. She had built her fortune by reading people accurately, by identifying their motivations and predicting their actions. The idea that she had been so completely deceived by someone she had trusted enough to marry was both professionally humiliating and personally devastating. Over the following days, Alexandra hired private investigators to trace James's identity and whereabouts. The investigation revealed that James Mitchell appeared to exist only in the context of their Vegas weekend. Hotel security cameras showed him arriving at the Aria alone, with no luggage beyond a small carry-on bag. Airport records showed no flights booked under his name, either arriving or departing Las Vegas during the relevant time frame. The most unsettling discovery was that James had paid cash for everything during their time together: meals, drinks, even the wedding ceremony. In an age when electronic payments created digital trails for every transaction, his complete avoidance of traceable purchases suggested either paranoid privacy concerns or professional training in avoiding detection. As days turned into weeks, Alexandra found herself obsessing over every moment of their brief relationship. She analyzed their conversations for clues about his true identity, studied the security footage for details that might reveal his real background, and questioned her own judgment in ways that undermined her confidence in other areas of her life. Practical implications of their marriage became increasingly complicated. Alexandra's lawyers were unable to locate James to serve divorce papers, while the Nevada marriage certificate remained legally valid despite his mysterious disappearance. Her business associates began to whisper about her judgment and stability, wondering how someone known for careful decision-making could have made such an obviously impulsive choice. But the emotional impact was far more devastating than any professional consequences. Alexandra had allowed herself to trust someone completely for the first time in decades, and that trust had been betrayed in the most absolute way possible. The vulnerability she had felt during their wedding night now seemed like weakness that had been expertly exploited by someone whose motivations remained completely unknown. 3 weeks after James's disappearance, Alexandra had almost convinced herself that she needed to accept the mystery and move forward with her life. She had scheduled legal consultations about obtaining an annulment, planned to increase security around her personal and business affairs, and began the psychological work of rebuilding her confidence in her own judgment. Then James Mitchell walked into her office building on a Tuesday morning in November, looking exactly as he had in Las Vegas, but carrying himself with a new gravity that suggested their separation had changed him as profoundly as it had affected her. James's return to Alexandra's life was as carefully orchestrated as his disappearance had been mysterious. He appeared in the lobby of her downtown Los Angeles office building at precisely 9 in the morning, wearing the same type of simple, dark suit that had made him forgettable in Vegas but now seemed ominous in its anonymity. Alexandra's security team recognized him immediately from the photographs she had provided during her desperate search for answers. Their protocol was to deny him access and contact law enforcement, but James presented credentials that changed everything: of a badge and identification from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a division of the U.S. Treasury Department that investigated money laundering, terrorist financing, and other sophisticated financial crimes. The man Alexandra had married as James Mitchell was actually Agent Robert Chun, a deep cover operative who had spent the past 18 months infiltrating a network of criminals using Las Vegas casinos to launder money from international drug trafficking and arms dealing. His encounter with Alexandra at the Aria poker table hadn't been coincidental. She had been under investigation as a potential money laundering asset due to her extensive international real estate holdings and her history of cash transactions. In markets known for financial crimes, Robert's mission had been to determine whether Alexandra was knowingly participating in money laundering schemes or if her business practices simply created opportunities that criminals were exploiting without her knowledge. The Treasury Department had received intelligence suggesting that several high-profile real estate developers were being used to clean dirty money through legitimate property investments, and Alexandra's profile had matched the pattern of other targets who had proven to be unwitting accomplices. The poker game where they met had been under federal surveillance for months. Robert's presence at the table was part of a broader operation to identify the key players in a money laundering network that was processing hundreds of millions of dollars annually. His cover identity as a consulting firm employee provided the perfect explanation for his travel patterns and his ability to appear wealthy without obvious sources of income. But Robert's investigation of Alexandra had produced unexpected complications. His surveillance of her business practices, her personal finances, and her social connections had revealed someone whose success was built on legitimate expertise and hard work rather than criminal association. More problematically, his interactions with her had generated genuine emotional connection that compromised his professional objectivity. The decision to marry Alexandra hadn't been part of his original mission plan. His handlers had instructed him to cultivate her trust sufficiently to gain access to her business records and financial systems. But marriage represented a level of deception that crossed ethical boundaries even for deep cover operations. Robert's impulsive proposal had been driven by emotions that he hadn't experienced during 15 years of undercover work. The wedding night they shared had been the most authentic moment of Robert's professional life, but it had also represented a catastrophic compromise of his mission. By allowing himself to develop genuine feelings for Alexandra, he had created a conflict of interest that made it impossible to investigate her objectively. His disappearance the next morning had been a desperate attempt to salvage both his professional integrity and his mission's objectives. Robert's 3-week absence from Alexandra's life had been spent in intensive debriefing sessions with his supervisors, psychological evaluation to assess his fitness for continued undercover work, and strategic planning to address the complications his emotional involvement had created. The Treasury Department faced a delicate situation. Their investigation had cleared Alexandra of any criminal involvement, but Robert's marriage to her had created legal and ethical complications that threatened the broader operation against the money laundering network. The solution his supervisors had developed was as complex as the problem Robert had created. He would return to Alexandra, reveal his true identity and mission, and request her cooperation in a controlled operation to identify and prosecute the criminals who had been using her business connections without her knowledge. In exchange for her assistance, the Treasury Department would provide complete immunity from prosecution and help her implement security measures to prevent future exploitation of her business operations. But Robert's return to Alexandra's office carried personal motivations that went beyond his professional obligations. During their separation, he had been forced to confront the reality that his feelings for her were genuine and profound. The marriage that had begun as an impulsive mistake had evolved into something he couldn't simply abandon for the sake of his career. Alexandra's reaction to Robert's revelations cycled through disbelief, anger, betrayal, and finally a cold assessment of her options that demonstrated why she had been successful in business. She listened to his explanation without interruption, asked pointed questions about the investigation and its implications for her business, and demanded to see documentation proving his identity and the legitimacy of his claims. The evidence Robert provided was comprehensive and devastating. Financial records showed patterns of suspicious transactions flowing through accounts connected to her real estate developments. Surveillance photographs revealed meetings between her business associates and known criminals. Wiretap recordings captured conversations where her name was mentioned in connection with properties being used to legitimize illegal profits. Most shocking was the revelation that several of Alexandra's most trusted employees had been compromised by the criminal network. Her head of international acquisitions had been receiving payments to structure deals that facilitated money laundering. Her chief financial officer had been manipulated into creating accounting systems that obscured the true sources of investment capital. Even her personal assistant had been recruited to provide information about Alexandra's schedule and business activities. Alexandra realized with growing horror that her entire professional life had been infiltrated by criminals who viewed her as an unwitting tool rather than a potential partner. Her reputation for integrity and her business acumen had made her the perfect vehicle for laundering dirty money precisely because she would never knowingly participate in such activities. But Robert's revelations also provided an opportunity for Alexandra to reclaim control of her business and her life. The Treasury Department's operation had identified the key players in the money laundering network and developed strategies to prosecute them without compromising Alexandra's legitimate business interests. Her cooperation would be essential for the success of these prosecutions, but it would also allow her to purge her organization of criminal influence and rebuild it with proper security measures. The personal dimension of Robert's return was more complicated than the professional considerations. Alexandra had to confront the reality that her marriage was built on deception, but also that the emotions she had experienced were genuine despite the artificial circumstances. Robert's confession that he had developed real feelings for her during their brief time together created the possibility of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than lies. Robert explained that his 15-year career in undercover law enforcement had cost him the ability to form authentic relationships with anyone outside his professional circle. His work required him to create false identities, manipulate targets' emotions, and maintain psychological distance from everyone he encountered. But something about Alexandra had broken through his professional defenses and reminded him of what genuine human connection felt like. The choice facing both of them was whether to attempt building a real relationship despite the deception that had brought them together. Robert's career would require him to testify in criminal proceedings that would expose their marriage as part of a federal investigation. Alexandra's cooperation with law enforcement would likely become public knowledge, potentially affecting her business reputation and personal privacy. But the alternative was to treat their connection as a mistake that should be forgotten, allowing the criminals who had exploited Alexandra's business to escape justice, while accepting that their brief moments of authentic intimacy had been meaningless illusions. As Robert finished his explanation, Alexandra found herself facing the most complex decision of her life. She could protect her business interests and personal privacy by refusing to cooperate with law enforcement, accepting an annulment of their marriage, and returning to the life she had built before their Vegas encounter. Or she could risk everything she had worked for by helping to prosecute the criminals who had used her, while exploring whether her relationship with Robert could survive the revelation of its deceptive origins. The office where they sat, surrounded by the symbols of Alexandra's legitimate success, felt like a courtroom where she was being asked to render judgment not just on Robert's actions, but on her own willingness to trust someone who had betrayed her even while claiming to love her. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Los Angeles stretched toward the horizon, a city built on dreams and reinvention where people routinely transformed themselves into something new. The question facing Alexandra was whether she possessed the courage to transform herself once more from someone who had been victimized by circumstances beyond her control into someone who would actively fight to reclaim her life and possibly her marriage. Robert waited for her response with the patience of someone who understood that some decisions couldn't be rushed. His return had shattered the mystery of his disappearance, but created new uncertainties about their future that were even more challenging than the questions his absence had raised. The woman who woke up alone in a Vegas hotel suite had been a victim of deception. The woman who now faced Robert across her executive conference table had the power to choose whether their story would end in betrayal and loss, or transform into something neither of them had anticipated when they impulsively decided to get married in a city built on taking chances.
Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.